Earlier this year, even before Donald Trump took office, I started talking to you about the need to build a new opposition movement in this country. Now, this is different from a resistance, and I made that clear then, and I want to make that clear now. A resistance is temporary. The idea is that if you resist Donald Trump long enough and you prevent him from doing bad things, implementing bad policies, breaking government, then those things can be prevented from setting in and normalcy can be returned. Now, this was the theory of the 2017 resistance to Donald Trump in his first administration. Millions of Americans took to the streets. Business leaders, civic leaders, institutions of higher education and law firms, they all stood their ground and essentially waited him out. And so when Donald Trump left office and Joe Biden came in, the same basic structure of our government and the same basic structure of our society was still in place. In fact, the biggest change was the result of COVID, not the result of Donald Trump, right? I mean, if you think about what your life was like, on December 31st, 2016, before Donald Trump took office, and you think about what your life was like on December 31st, 2020, after Donald Trump's term was about to end, the biggest changes were the result of COVID, not the result of the Trump administration. We had Zoom, we were all working remotely, right? All of that stuff was COVID related, not Donald Trump. I knew, even before he took the oath of office this time, that this was not going to be true in 2025 and in the years to follow. This time, Donald Trump's entire goal was to break those institutions, to violate those norms, and not just to break them and violate them during his tenure, but to burn them to their foundation so that they could not be rebuilt. An opposition movement is needed because it is looking at the question of how, over the long term, we can build new institutions. We can build new structures. We can build new tactics, new strategies that are fundamentally different than the ones that came before. Now, I thought about this recently because I hosted a panel discussion on Constiution Day. That video is part of this channel. You can go ahead and look at it right now. We'll put it in the description of this video below as well. And at the end of the discussion period, we went to audience questions, and the very first question we got was from Professor Larry Tribe of Harvard. Now, for those of you who don't know Professor Tribe, he is literally the most accomplished constitutional law professor and lawyer of the last half century. I mean, he literally wrote the textbook that has been used to teach an entire generation of law students about constitutional law of interpretation. He is a giant among giants in the field of constitutional law. So here I was hosting this panel, and along comes Professor Tribe with the first audience question, and it was as follows. How confident are you that we will rebuild our democratic institutions and norms in less than a decade after Trump leaves office? Now, to be honest, I've been asked variants of this question almost every day. People want to know whether or not we're going to be able to rebuild democracy. They want to know whether, when Donald Trump leaves office, there is hope for American democracy, or whether it is permanently broken. But as I was thinking about the way in which Professor Tribe phrased this question, I was struck by the prospect of an 83-year-old professor asking me what the likelihood of American democracy recovering by 2039. Right? This wasn't the usual question that many of you will post in the comments section here about what it will look like in 2028 or 2029 or after the next census redistricting in 2031 or 2032. Right? Here is the foremost scholar on the Constitution putting a very different temporal frame in front of us. And I think he did this because his conception of what has to be done mirrors my own. It is not just evicting Donald Trump from the Oval Office. It's not just putting another Democrat in that position of power. It's not even about giving them a Democratic House and a Democratic Senate, maybe even a filibuster-proof Democratic Senate. It's not just about those things. It is about the rebuilding of entire structures of democracy. And that, I hate to tell you, is not going to be done in a year or 2 years or 3 years or 4 years. I'm not even sure it will be done in the 10 years, which was the time frame that Professor Tribe gave me. So in order to answer this question, in order to, sort of reflect on what's the likelihood that we'll be able to do this, I think we have to dig into what exactly it means to rebuild American democracy. What does it mean to rebuild, in his phrase, our democratic institutions and norms? Because those will not be the same institutions and norms that we had in place. Let us be clear. Donald Trump's attacks on democracy are going to have long-lasting impacts, period. No matter who wins next, no matter who controls Congress, and even no matter who controls the U.S. Supreme Court. Presidential immunity from criminal prosecution is a fact. It is baked into the cake right now. The Supreme Court said that presidents cannot be criminally prosecuted for their official acts. And Donald Trump, over the first few months of being in power, has shown us how that can be weaponized in an unprecedented way. I'm sure many would say in a way that was unforeseen and unforeseeable. If you think it was unforeseen and unforeseeable, go back and look at the videos I posted. Go back and look what I wrote when the Supreme Court was considering that case. It was both foreseeable and foreseen, but it is now permanent. It is not going to change. It's not going to change under a Democratic president. It's not going to change under a more liberal Supreme Court. We have now this absolute presidential immunity, and that will change the behavior of presidents. Now, it'll change the behavior of criminal presidents more than it will those who are acting in the public spirit and in the general welfare. But it is going to change all of their behaviors because it is a guardrail that has been removed. It is a shackle on them that has been taken away. We also know that the broad sweeping powers that presidents have been given to hire and fire workers in the executive branch, from the lowest level civil servant up to the heads of independent agencies who are supposed to not be able to be removed, the broad sweep of what Donald Trump has done that is now being blessed by the Supreme Court is going to fundamentally change what American democracy means. For a generation that has grown up with the idea that there are expert agencies that are immune from the politics of one administration or the next, get over it. That is just not true. Now, do I think Democratic presidents will put genuine experts in those positions? Yes. But they won't have to. They won't be required to. They won't be required to respect the kinds of rules about permanency and expertise that have existed. And that too is going to change fundamentally what our system of government looks like. Look at what the White House is currently doing with the Department of Justice. It was not that long ago that the idea that Joe Biden might say on 60 Minutes or on a broadcast television interview that he thinks his son was innocent. That was almost a scandal, right? Here it is, the President of the United States. How dare he weigh in on the innocence of his son when there was a Department of Justice investigation of him? Right, this is what we heard. We heard this, by the way, not just from people on the right. We heard this from some people on the left who said that the principle of DOJ independence was inviolable, and they were disappointed that Joe Biden would have the audacity to opine on the fact that he believes his son was innocent. A father saying his son was innocent was enough to create a mini scandal. I mean, we could talk about Bill Clinton long after his presidency, when he's not in office, Hillary Clinton's not in office, visiting his longtime friend, who happened at the time to be the Attorney General of the United States, on the tarmac at an airport when they ran into each other to exchange pleasantries. That was treated as a national scandal for days upon days upon days. Okay? That's where we were. We are never going back there. No matter what the next president says, no matter who the next attorney general is, we are never going back to the world of Joe Biden and Merrick Garland. We are never going back to a world in which the Department of Justice acts like it is entirely independent, that it is without any connections to the White House. Now, do I think the new opposition movement should embrace what Donald Trump has done? No, absolutely not. I think what Donald Trump has done is dangerous. It's a weaponization of government, and nobody should be doing that. But do I think we are going to go back? No. The role of the courts have been altered. The fact is the U.S. Supreme Court has severely limited the ability of district courts to issue nationwide injunctions and universal relief. That is now percolated throughout the federal judiciary. They said it. District court judges around the country are no longer enjoining illegal and unconstitutional acts by the federal government on a nationwide basis. They're no longer giving relief to everyone. They are now limiting their rulings in much more cramped ways. That is a permanent feature, at least for the next many years. The speed with which the Supreme Court acts has changed, right? I mean, you've all noticed this. The shadow docket has become this big thing now by which the Supreme Court hears challenges and resolves them before lower courts have even finished considering the cases. That's not going to change. And this partial list I just gave you is before we get to the Supreme Court's next term, where they will hear cases and resolve issues involving the Voting Rights Act, campaign finance, mid-cycle redistricting, tariffs, the power of the president to usurp congressional authority without any check or balance, and of course, immigration policy. All of those things, by the time Donald Trump leaves office, will look unrecognizable to someone who last turned on the news when Joe Biden was having his last day in office. The changes have been systemic, systematic, and incredibly impactful. Now, look, I'm not defending them. When I say impactful, I don't mean for the good. Almost all of these things I said are impactful for bad reasons. But they are what they are. So I want to tell you something. If we as Democrats and as liberals and as progressives spend the next 4 years thinking that we can just turn back the clock and restore everything to the way it was, we will fail, we will be disillusioned and disheartened when it doesn't work, and frankly, we will have wasted our goddamn time for 4 years. We cannot do that. We have to use this time right now to start building a durable opposition movement. Now, that is a lot harder. It comes with a lot less immediate gratification. It won't feel every day like we have accomplished something big, but it is the necessary hard work that we have to start today if we are to meet the timetable that Professor Tribe gave me, which was 2039. So let me talk about what I think the constituent pieces, the building blocks of this look like. But before I do, I got to ask you to do me a favor. Right in front of you is a button that says subscribe. Subscribe to this video. I'm putting a lot of energy and time into keeping you informed and educated about what is happening to democracy, and the best way for you to keep yourself informed is to subscribe to this channel. It'll also increase the reach of these videos to others. Even better, hit the button with the little bell, and that will make sure you get alerts every time we post new content. All of that is entirely free. Now, what do I think we have to do to build this new opposition movement? The first thing we need to do is we need to rethink our strategies and our institutions and our tactics about winning elections. Because if you don't win elections, you don't have power. Okay? You can have all the great ideas in the world. You can think you've solved, the debt crisis, the problem of healthcare. You can think all of that. But if you do not have the levers of power to implement those policies are for naught. They are just words printed in a book that doesn't have any impact. So we need to first prioritize winning election campaigns. And that's going to be tough for a lot of people. That may be tough for some of you, but I'm not here to tell you what you want to hear. I am here to tell you the truth. And if we don't prioritize winning campaigns, then we are just wasting our time with everything else that's going to come. Now, that means having a big enough tent that we can capture a majority in Congress, the Electoral College, state legislatures, governor's offices. We cannot have a purity test that shrinks us so that we are holding less and less power in fewer and fewer places. Now, look, I want to be clear. I'm not telling any faction or any group within the Democratic Party or the Liberal Coalition or the Progressive Coalition or the Center-Left Coalition, call it what you want, okay? I'm not here to dictate to you who should be the winners and who should be the losers. I'm here to say you should all be winners. I want more blue dogs in office and I want more progressives in office. I want more old-time liberals in office. I want newer candidates in office. I want more candidates in the Deep South who are Democrats running and winning, and I want more Democrats in the Northeast and the Pacific West running and winning. Okay? This is not about intra-party or intra-movement warfare. I have literally no tolerance for that. If you are spending your time attacking some other branch or wing of the Democratic coalition or the liberal movement or the progressive cause, if that's where you're spending your time, you might as well just turn this video off because I'm not your guy. Because by doing that, you're not building a new opposition movement. You're shrinking it. You're not doing the things necessary to restore democracy and democratic institutions by 2039. You are undermining them. We do not need a purity test in the center or on the left or on any of the gradations in between. We don't need a purity movement by geography or by region or even by issue. We need people to band together because we agree about far more than we will ever disagree. And we understand the need to band together in favor of pro-democracy policies, candidates, and movements. Now, having said that, once we win elections, we have to govern. And it's not enough to tell people you should just elect us because you should elect us, right? Voters wait in line to vote, not because they think that it's really important for any one person to be in office, but because they believe that by voting and putting someone in office, they will make their lives, the voters, better. So we need to do that. We need new policy ideas. Now, in future videos, I will tackle some of these, but let me lay out a framework for today. A new policy idea is not taking the old policy idea and just dusting it off. There are going to be a lot of people and interest groups who simply want to take their agenda under the Biden administration, which was likely their agenda under the Trump administration, which was likely their agenda under the Obama administration. You get my point. They're just going to want to take that and say, okay, if Democrats regain electoral power, let's just do that. That is not the new policy ideas we need. I started this video by telling you this is not a resistance. This is an opposition. We are not going back to where we were. And if we think that the policy ideas we were promoting as part of Kamala Harris's campaign or Joe Biden's campaign, or as when Democrats had the House and Senate, or when Barack Obama was in office, if we think that that is the policy ideas we have now, take a seat, let someone else come up with some ideas. The ideas we promote moving forward need to take into account the reality of what has become of our country. They need to recognize that we no longer have truly independent agencies. They need to understand that presidents have complete immunity. They need to factor in the fact that there are no longer easily accessible nationwide injunctions. They may need to take into account the fact that the Voting Rights Act has been diminished. Simply saying we're going to pass another policy that was premised on things that are no longer true, it may be good politics talking to yourselves, but it is not going to be effective in building a new democratic movement that has vitality, that has strength, that has originality, and that strikes voters as addressing their real problems today. What else do we need to do? We're going to need to build new structures. That's okay. New structures are good. Every structure and organization and institution you cherish today was at one point or another in history new. Every agency you like at some point didn't exist and then came into existence, and it was new. Every nonprofit organization, every NGO, every charity, every political group, every political organization, all the ones you love most today, they were new at some point. So new organizations is not a threat. It's an opportunity. It's an opportunity to take a look at the world in which it is today, a world in which Donald Trump is dominating large institutions, a world in which the Supreme Court is cutting back on critical protections and civil rights. It is a world in which corporate America are afraid to stand up for their employees, stand up for their values, and even stand up for their right of their comedians to tell jokes. Okay, if you don't think we need new institutions when our current institutions, some of their largest ones, are failing us, then again, you are living in a reality that does not exist. We are not going back to the era of Joe Biden. This is going to look very different, and it will be uncomfortable. And what that means is that we are going to need new structures that address that new reality and that new discomfort. That means, for example, we are going to need organizations that look at the law as it is, not as we want it to be, but the law as it is, and tackles the questions of voting rights and campaign finance and redistricting. We are going to need new institutions that look at immigration policy and the international order and economic policy, not as we wish them to be, but as they are. We're going to need new organizations that protect executive branch workers, that protect the role of federal prosecutors in a way that prior institutions simply didn't need to, because we had different norms and different institutions. This is not saying that none of the existing organizations will survive or that they won't thrive. Some of the existing organizations will pick up this mantle and they will change. Some of them may have not been as prominent in the past and will now come to the fore, and altogether new ones will be formed. And yes, some will go away. That's okay. To build a new pro-democracy opposition, we need that kind of dynamic change. We need that kind of growth. We need that kind of new thinking and new engagement around not just our policies, not just our elections, but also around our institutions. There are a couple of things that we need to do right now that, frankly, are hard for people to even figure out how to start, right? I mean, they can say, all right, electoral campaigns, I got that, volunteer for campaigns, support more candidates, whatever. Policy ideas, people can understand how to approach that, how to debate new policies, new structures, form new groups, give them missions, see what works. People get that. Here are two that are, frankly, bigger challenges. We need new theories of government. I'm just going to say this. The Republican Party and the right wing has had new theories of government that they have been nurturing for decades. The unitary executive theory did not come about under Donald Trump. This has been on the wish list of conservative thinkers going back to the Reagan era. The idea of undermining voting rights is not a new theory. Republicans and people on the right have been thinking about that for more than 50 years. They have done it through institutions like the Federalist Society. They have done it through think tanks like the Heritage Foundation. One of the things about Project 2025 that I always find interesting to tell people is Project 2025 was not the first time that the right wing had published a blueprint for governing. Project 2025 was not new. And by that, I mean it was not just new in that the ideas in it had been around for a while, but even the concept of a blueprint document like that was not new. They've been doing that for decades. And so those of us who are on the left, those of us who are liberals, those of us who are Democrats, we cannot just be a bumper sticker theory of government. We cannot just say we want to repeal this Supreme Court decision and change that law and think we have changed the theories of government. We cannot say we want to roll back the Supreme Court's decision on abortion and say that that is a new jurisprudence. Is Dobbs wrongly decided in my view? Yes. Should we work towards finding a way to restore a woman's right to control her own reproductive future? Yes. But is that going to be done by simply dusting off Roe versus Wade and the various cases that followed it and just say, this is it? No. So these two things, a new theory of government and a new jurisprudence, are essential, but they're hard. They're really hard. What is the pro-democracy theory of government? What is a pro-democracy jurisprudence? These are not questions you are asked very often. They are not questions you see other people asking. They are not topics that are the subject of discussion in any concrete way. Because, frankly, too many people on the left, too many people in the liberal establishment, too many people at pro-democracy groups, they are just pining for the policy ideas that they had before. They just want the jurisprudence to be what it was. They just want government to operate as it did. And that is just never going to happen. You know, I had this discussion recently with someone who said, well, you know, Mark, I hear you, but after Watergate, Democrats campaigned, Jimmy Carter and Democrats campaigned on reining in the power of presidents because Richard Nixon was viewed as a dictator or a wannabe dictator. And so this person said to me, look, you can go back. That's what they did after Watergate with the Watergate reform. That is not what they did after Watergate. The Watergate reforms were radical new ideas. What came after Richard Nixon was not Lyndon Johnson's federal government. It was something radically different. The idea that you could submit an open records request, a FOIA, and get copies of documents in the federal government was not something that had existed before Richard Nixon. That was a radical idea. That was a new theory of government. The idea that you would regulate campaign spending by having contribution limits to candidates and limits on what coordination you could do with outside organizations, and that there'd be this agency called the Federal Election Commission where you'd have to report all your donations if you were a candidate of more than $200 per person per year or per election cycle. This was radically new. This was not the restoration of pre-Nixon. This was a bold new vision of what a pro-democracy government would look like. The jurisprudential ideas that came out after Richard Nixon to cabin in executive power were, again, they were cabining in executive power. I mean, John Kennedy was a hero in my household. He had been assassinated before I was ever born, but my parents revered him. His brother was the Attorney General. Right? I mean, the idea that the Department of Justice is independent of the president, that was not a pre-Nixon idea. That was something radically new and different. And so we need to understand that whether it is what Democrats did after Nixon, what Republicans did with Reagan, what is going on right now with Donald Trump, these changes are not going to get rolled back. They're either going to become the new status quo, they will metastasize to become worse, or, and this is up to you and me, or we will build upon them a new set of policy structures, theories of government, and jurisprudence. So I want to lay out two ideas to kick off the discussion. As I said, we're going to do a series of videos in which we go through each of these in more detail. But I just want to give you some ideas, since these are the least concrete, right? These are the ones that are hardest for people to get their minds around and say, how do we even do that? I want to kick these off with a couple. I'm very struck by a conversation I had with Congressman Raskin in one of my podcast interviews. You can go find the video. It's here on the channel, in which he made the point that the common expression that there are three co-equal branches of government is wrong. Now, saying that we have three co-equal branches of government is what you learned in school. Okay, that is the dogma of the day. We have three branches of government, they check and balance each other, they're all equal, and they all have powers that check the other. That has been the dominant framework of how we think about the structure of our government, our federal government. Jamie Raskin says that's just not true. That if you go back to the founders, what they had in mind was a Congress that was much more powerful than either of the other two branches. That the executive branch, the presidency, was the weakest of the three branches. Because its main power, the president's main power, is to take care that the laws passed by Congress are faithfully executed. So here's one theory of government. Let's jettison the idea of three co-equal branches of government. And let's just say that Congress is more powerful than the presidency. Now, we have to work out what exactly that means, where those powers begin and end, how the courts fit into that, right? It's sometimes called the least dangerous branch. I'm not sure that's true, but we have to figure that out. But maybe we could just start this discussion with an idea that there are not three equal branches of government. There are three separate branches of government. There are checks and balances between the three branches of government. But in fact, Congress should be the most powerful branch. Okay? That's a theory of government that right now is not at all in vogue. It is definitely not unitary executive and the strong executive theory on the right. And honestly, it's not the theory on the left. Why? Because I don't think there is really a theory on the left of government other than let's go back to three co-equal branches of government in which we have independent agencies and presidents do the right things and they don't talk to the attorney general and they don't set tariff policy at a whim and blah, 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 and blah, 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 blah. Okay? We're not going back to that. So I'm offering a way forward on this one about theories of government as a jumping off point. Again, I will have more to say about that as part of this series. Please take a second, click the subscribe button, hit the bell, because you're not going to want to miss those videos when we roll them out in the future. On jurisprudence. So look, I have been advocating. I have written about this for Democracy Docket over and over and over again, and I can promise you, you're going to get a whole video on this one. We need a jurisprudence that is pro-voting. We need a jurisprudence that does not say that election officials are the hero of the story. They are not the hero of the story. Too many of you out there, you turn the election officials into the hero of voting. The hero of the voting story are the voters. The election officials, they can be helpful to voters or they can be harmful to voters. We have good examples of both, right? We have examples of election deniers undermining voting rights, and we have examples of hardworking election officials helping voting rights, but they are not the centerpiece of this story. The center of this story needs to be voters. Our jurisprudence does not center voters. Oh, no, no. Our jurisprudence centers election officials and state legislatures that pass election laws. So I don't want to go too deep in this now because I'm going to have plenty of time to unpack this on a later episode. But, you know, you've all heard of fundamental rights. When you have a fundamental right, the government can't take it away or burden it without surviving what's called strict scrutiny, which means they need a really, really good reason. What the law says or what the Supreme Court says is a compelling reason. And then, even if they've got a compelling reason to infringe on your rights, it needs to be narrowly tailored. In other words, the infringement of your rights needs to be as narrow as possible to meet that compelling state interest. Okay? That's how fundamental rights work. except for the right to vote. For the right to vote, the test is quite different. It is a balancing test. It is a balancing test of how much inconvenience the restriction on your right is to you versus how much of a benefit it is to the people who run elections, to the state election officials, the election workers. Essentially, they're balancing your right to vote against their convenience. This is horribly wrong. No one's ever going to convince me that this balancing test, that this idea that we take the right to vote, which we say is a right and is preservative of all other rights, that's not my words, that's from an old US Supreme Court case. It is the right that preserves all other rights. And somehow we balance it. We don't do that with free speech. We don't say, well, it would be really inconvenient for the government if you spoke about that, so please don't. And if you do, we'll throw you in jail. The only place where we do this balancing test with a right is the right to vote. That is bad jurisprudence. That is bad jurisprudence. And if we are going to have a pro-democracy jurisprudence, it needs to start with saying that we are going to center voters, not the state, not the election officials, but voters in our voting jurisprudence. Now, again, these are just two small examples, one on theory of government, one on jurisprudence, to give you an idea of what I mean by those, because, as I said, those can be a little bit more esoteric. There's one more thing we have to change, and we need to change this one now. Okay? We're not in a position to change the jurisprudence. We are in a position to start coalescing around a jurisprudence and advancing that jurisprudence and building out the intellectual foundation of that jurisprudence and popularizing that jurisprudence and building it into our law schools so that people are aware of it. And that's, by the way, what I just described is what the Federalist Society and other groups did around all of these conservative things, right? It's not too soon to start that, but we're not going to we're not going to adopt a new jurisprudence and have it be in effect right away. Same with the theory of government. What we can do right away, though, is the last one. We need new methods of communication and new messengers. We, as an opposition movement, need to figure out how better to communicate with people. We need to figure out better who are the right messengers to do that communication. We have lived for some time now in a world in which you have a hierarchy. At the top of that hierarchy, you have highly credentialed individuals. They are either credentialed because of their expertise in educational credentials, they are credentialed because of their experience, or they're credentialed because of the position in government they hold. So, the reason why I initially got asked on a lot of television shows was I was highly credentialed. I am a lawyer, I went to a law school, I've litigated cases, I've won cases, I've litigated in the Supreme Court and won. I've done a lot of things that allow people to say, Mark Elias is an expert on election law. Mark Elias is a leading figure in campaign finance law. He is a Democratic super lawyer. Okay, these are all things people have said about me. And the reason why the media would introduce me that way is because what they were looking for was to sell to their audience from the top down. Look, audience, we have this expert. And because he's an expert, you should believe him. And because we are the gatekeeper to this expert, because we control the airwaves, you should believe us. And that's how media and communications worked. It merged the messenger, the method of communication, and the message being communicated kind of like in a very small number of people. That is gone. I don't mean it's going. I mean it's gone. Now, there are lots of executives at Disney and Paramount and Comcast who do not know it's gone. Okay, they still think that they are in charge. They still think that they are the gatekeepers. They still think that if they put me as an expert on their airwaves, that they are setting the agenda. They are defining for the viewers how to think about issues. And if they put me and a Republican or a conservative lawyer on and give both sides By golly, they have done their job, and the public will now absorb this as the truth. It's just not true. It's just not true. Depending on how many of you watch this video, more of you may watch me today than will watch me on any of my TV appearances. And for a large number of you, you didn't even come here because I went to law school. I mean, it may be that the fact that I'm a lawyer and I litigate cases and I've been involved in redistricting cases and voting rights cases, like that is a nice to have, but it is not the must have. The must have is that you are getting useful information from someone who you find reliable. And sure, credentials go into that. One way you measure reliability, that I'm not a crackpot, is that I have argued before the Supreme Court and won, that I am a lawyer, that I do, that I do speak out on these issues, that I write, all of those things go into it. But really, it's only a part of what makes you think that I am worth listening to. You are judging for yourself, whether it's me in this video or it's anyone else on YouTube, or frankly, anyone else on any other platform. You are judging for yourself whether the relationship you have with that person is such that you trust them. That's right. You're deciding whether you trust them. You're not outsourcing that to the credentials controllers at the networks. Well, the problem is, as an opposition movement, we have not moved beyond that. I benefit from this system in many respects because the old method of communications platforms me a lot. But we're not going to build a successful opposition movement if we think that it runs through the hallways of Meet the Press. We are not going to build a new opposition movement that's successful if we believe that only the people with the biggest titles are the best messengers. Senators, members of Congress are a lot of things, and some of them are very good messengers. But they're not necessarily the best messengers for a pro-democracy opposition. They didn't run to be pro-democracy messengers. They ran to serve honorably in legislative bodies. So we need to be open to changing our methods of communications and our messengers. So before I leave this, I want to tell you something that I found really striking in the failure of the legacy media to report on the Jimmy Kimmel situation. All of you know that Jimmy Kimmel was taken off the air by ABC News because they were bowing down to the Trump administration. All of you know that Jimmy Kimmel was then put back on the air because of pressure from the artist community and, frankly, from subscribers to Disney's various products. The legacy media made a big deal about Jimmy Kimmel's return and his ratings. And they were notable. Jimmy Kimmel had 6 million people watch on television his first night back. 6 million, that's a lot. And that's what you would know if you read the legacy media. If you listened to the messengers and followed the communication methods that have been in place for the last several decades. But what they didn't tell you is that 26 million people watched Jimmy Kimmel on YouTube. That's the story. That's the news. The news is not that 6 million people watched Jimmy Kimmel on linear television. The news is that more than 4 times that number watched that same monologue on YouTube. Now, it's no surprise that the legacy media is not like bragging about the YouTube numbers relative to the linear television numbers, because most of the legacy media is invested in the linear television model. But it should tell you something, and it should tell the pro-democracy movement something really important about where people are consuming their content. And what's interesting about this one is they can't discount it. A lot of times the legacy media, they're like, well, the people on YouTube, they're influencers or they're content creators, but they're not journalists. Okay, again, a topic for another day. But Jimmy Kimmel was the same Jimmy Kimmel on both platforms. Right? This was apples to apples. This was not comparing, the nightly news buttoned up suit guy on ABC, NBC, or CBS with, an influencer on YouTube. It wasn't comparing those two. This was actually literally comparing Jimmy Kimmel with Jimmy Kimmel. And people were watching him on YouTube. Now, look, I'm not here to do an advertisement for YouTube or for Google. They can take care of themselves. My point is different. We need to communicate in different ways. You all are watching this YouTube video. By the time you are watching this segment of this YouTube video, you have been watching for a longer period of time than you probably will ever watch a nightly news broadcast. And that is important. There is something for us to learn there. We so oftentimes hear that when people say new media, when they say new messengers, what people hear is young people on TikTok. I'm all for young people on TikTok. That is an important new method of communication, and they're important new messengers. I am not a young person. I am not on TikTok. I'm talking to you as a 56-year-old lawyer in long form on YouTube. So it's not that I'm saying it's this platform or the communicators have to look like this or they have to be in this demographic or that demographic. I'm here to say we need to rethink all of it. And that is as important as all of the other things I listed. Winning electoral campaigns, coming up with compelling new big tent policy ideas, building new structures to support a pro-democracy movement, investing in new theories of government and new jurisprudence. We also need to be building new communication methods and identifying new messengers. So those are the things I think we need to do in order to build a permanent opposition to restore American democracy. I mentioned at the beginning that Larry Tribe is the most recognized and decorated constitutional lawyer of the last 50 years. And I mentioned his age. He's as sharp today as he ever was. He is an intellectual giant, and he is a genius. And in his question as an 83-year-old, asking about the restoration of democracy by 2039, he is expressing confidence in all of you. He is expressing a hopeful belief that the answer is yes. By 10 years after Donald Trump leaves office, we will have rebuilt. We will have built better than before the democratic institutions and norms. But his question is also saying that they're not going to be the same. And that is not something to lament. It is not something to mourn. It is something to view as a reality and, more importantly, as an opportunity. And so we at Democracy Docket are going to spend a lot of time helping you make sense of this. I am spending a lot of my time when I am not in court, when I am not practicing law. I am spending a lot of my time thinking about these things, and I will be bringing them to you. They won't always be right. They won't always be the finished product. Sometimes they will be a partial answer, but come on this journey with us. Be part of this discussion. It does not matter whether you have a law degree or not. It does not matter whether you are involved professionally in politics or you are retired. It doesn't matter whether you are a student or a nurse or you are someone who votes occasionally or votes in every election. All of us have a stake in democracy, and all of us can add something to one of the topics that I discussed. So please subscribe to this channel, hit the bell, and I will see you next time.